Welcome back to Science. Let's take a look. You're listening to KTAL LP, Las Cruces, New Mexico, 101.5 on your dial or virtual dial. We're also streaming at lccommunityradio.org. Okay, this is the very first show, the inaugural show, and we've gone through why are plants green, and then we went on to risks, including the radioactivity in bananas. And on to DNA mutations. Let me just say that I'm pleased to hear comments, suggestions, whatever from you. You can text my phone at 575-571-2269. You can email me at vince.gutschick@gmail.com. That's Gutschik. We're doing a lot of biology this time, tying in chemistry and physics, which has been sort of my career over, I won't say how many years right now. Okay, plant toxins. Plants contain a lot of toxins naturally. So it's fairly obvious when you think about it. They don't want to be eaten. They can't run away. They're sessile, as we say. Herbivores can get to them. Pests can get to them, insects especially, and so can bacteria and fungi. So they are loaded with what some people call secondary compounds, as if they're not important. They're very important. These plants are not going to be sticking around unless they have this protective, whole set of protective mechanisms. So what are some of these toxins? Well, some of them are pretty obvious. Strychnine in the nut Strychnos nux vomica. The vomica is obvious. There are, nicotine, right? We use it for pleasure, but basically it's to try to kill you. And a lot of plants have protease inhibitors that stop us from digesting their proteins. It works on insects, it works on us. And here's an interesting one. The Brassicaceae, that's a family that includes cabbage. Now, cabbage has actually been bred to be about 5 or 6 different kinds of plants. Cabbage, kale, kohlrabi, Brussels sprouts. I'm missing somebody. Anyway, these plants contain what are called goitrogens. They interfere with our iodine metabolism. We need iodine for our thyroid, and without it, we suffer low metabolic rates and a number of other things, and including generating goiters, these overgrowths of the thyroid gland. So goitrogens seem to be an odd thing. You would say that the plants didn't evolve this to keep humans from eating them. I don't know about you, but I was deterred from Brussels sprouts by their taste. I know I'm in the minority, perhaps. But it's very slow-acting toxin. I mean, you have to have a cumulative exposure of, months, years. So that might be sort of an accident. It's almost like some of the toxins, incredible toxins, like tetrodotoxin. They weren't meant to prevent Japanese people from eating fugu, but they're pretty amazing when they act. Or let's get away from the food crops and talk about botulism. So Clostridium botulinum, which is present all over the place in soil, is making this botulinum toxin. It is the most toxic molecule known. I forget how many tens of micrograms or whatever will kill you. And we've known at least one person who was almost killed by it. It has no purpose killing people. Clostridium isn't normally ingested by people with intent to eat it, but it just happens. Okay. So what do we do about toxins in plants? One thing is to try to breed them out. Now, that's been done very deliberately and scientifically recently by plant breeders all over the world. It also has been done historically and prehistorically by peoples in various cultures all over the world. So we're getting, you might say, less and less toxic plants for us to eat. That's our food. Well, there's a drawback to that. If it's less toxic to us, it's less toxic to pests. And who knows, maybe there's some crossover with resistance to diseases. So we still lose about 1/3 of all crop yield in the field. This is before we even start wasting food in the home and so on. Because even with new pesticides, herbicides, and so on, and cropping methods, we've got very attractive crops for the organisms competing with us. And that sort of leads into GMOs. Okay, that's a hot topic, a hot button for most people. Some people are very worried about the toxicity of GMOs. I, for one, am not. There's no significant evidence that the modified proteins are a problem for us. Now you say, okay, they came from some distantly related organism. Okay, we're all related through bacteria when you go back far enough. But other things have been incorporated into us, into our own genomes over evolutionary time. I'm trying to remember what percent, maybe it's 6% of our own genome is really bacterial and viral. So we've been genetically engineered. Some of the crops that we like, the legumes, peas, beans, and so on, they have a gene called, a protein that they make called leg hemoglobin that helps transport oxygen in the nodules in the roots that help fix nitrogen from the air, ultimately giving us more protein. And that actually came from bacteria by all good accounts. So there have been transfers of genes across widely disparate species. Okay, so for me, the concern is really corporate control. Well, Monsanto is nobody's great friend as far as I hear. And then there's the things that are used with the genetically modified organisms, such as glyphosate, Roundup. How big an impact does glyphosate have? Well, I was talking with some friends, and they said they saw a demonstration where somebody was purporting to show the safety of glyphosate drinking bits of Roundup. Probably not a good idea anyway, but it doesn't seem to be all that toxic for humans. So many other things that we eat naturally are toxic. We've talked about what's in crops. But there is one consideration about glyphosate that is significant. It breaks down in soil. You want it to break down, right? And the first product, I'm trying to remember the name of it, actually interferes a bit with the uptake of iron and manganese by the plants. Well, how big a problem is that? We have plenty of food here. It's not true everywhere. Okay, so you've got the biggest single mineral nutrient deficiency in the world is iron deficiency. So glyphosate is a potential significant problem there. And that's probably most of what I can cover about GMOs at this point. So let's pick another thing. It's again about crops. What's keeping us alive? And I mean in the large. Like when you consider how many people we are on Earth, 7+ billion, 7.3 billion. I already talked about irrigation water earlier, where we devote 70% of all our managed water supplies to irrigating crops, so that we gain 1/3 in production with only 1/10 of the land surface being used that way. And then you go along with the water depletion, and so on. But here's one that most people don't think about: ammonia synthesis. So a lot of plants are fertilized with ammonia-based fertilizer. And that was actually a huge change in world cropping. So in the past, people would return wastes, manure, human excrement, and so on, and still do in many places. That restores particularly the nitrogen and the phosphorus to the soil. But you might say we just don't poop where we grow our crops anymore. So what do? We've got to replace those lost nutrients. It's a huge industry. We now make industrial fixation of nitrogen into ammonia on a scale that dwarfs, it's somewhat bigger than natural biological and abiological nitrogen fixation on the earth. Why did it happen? Well, actually there's a connection with war. Okay. People did realize they were running out of nitrogen fertilizers, but just before World War I, when Germany was about to embark on their imperialistic program, they realized that they were going to be cut off, or they had been cut off from the deposits of guano, which bird excrement, which is rich in nitrogen and nitrates. So they worked hard on making an artificial process, and there were some very inefficient processes, sparking electricity through mixtures of nitrogen and oxygen, basically air. But Karl Bosch and Fritz Haber came up ultimately working on two different aspects to make industrial synthesis of ammonia very effective. Their stories have taken really dark turns. I think it was Karl Bosch who worked also on chlorine as a nerve gas, or as chemical warfare in World War I. His wife committed suicide just before it was used. And let's see, Fritz Haber. I've got some notes somewhere. I'll do that next time. But it ended rather disastrously for these two scientists. So not everything that has a positive outcome is positive for the people who do them. Anyway, it's just about the hour right now, so I'm going to sign off. Again, you're listening to KTAL LP, Las Cruces, New Mexico, 101.5 on your dial or your virtual dial, and we're streaming at lccommunityradio.org. I'm Vince Gutschick, your host on Tuesdays at noon to 1 on a program I call Science. Let's take a look. Thanks for listening.